Hey everybody, in this lesson I want to show you how to create the image you see on the screen here. This is created using what's called a clipping mask and placing an image here inside of text, again using a clipping mask. It's a pretty simple technique but super useful in different ways. You're going to learn how here to use the text tool to create your text, how to choose a font that works best with this kind of effect. Also, we're going to learn how to use the character palette to adjust our font, as well as how to use some keyboard shortcuts for adjusting the spacing between characters, and how to add a faux bold to our font to make it look a little bolder. We'll again learn how to use the clipping mask to create the effect you see here, bringing in an image and placing it inside the text. Finally, we'll add a few layer effects like a drop shadow like you see here, as well as adding a solid color background layer to our image. You can see the one I have here, also see some others done by some of my other students where they actually use this technique but put a different image inside of each letter, creating a pretty cool technique, or a pretty cool effect, as you can see by these examples here. Okay, let's get started. What we're going to do is go ahead and create a new document, file new, and let's just make it a pretty large document. We'll go 1600 pixels, make sure it's pixels, by about 1200 pixels, and we'll set it to 96 pixels per inch, or PPI. That'll be a good resolution. We're using the RGB color mode, white background, and that'll do it. Hit OK. We've got our starting document here. Okay, the first thing we need to do is put our text into this document. We're going to need our text tool, which we see on the toolbar here. You can also press the T key on your keyboard to get the text tool to be selected. With that selected, before you type anything, it's a good idea to first select your font. Let's choose an Arial bold for this. If you can't find it in the list, just type in the word Arial up here. We see Arial bold is our option. With that selected, let's go ahead and type our word in all caps, tigers. It's a little bit small, and we want it much bigger, so let's go ahead and highlight the letters by clicking and dragging across it, coming up and finding the text font size property up here. If you click and hold and drag to the right, it's going to make your text larger. You can take the move tool and move it into the center of the screen. You really want the words to fill up the entire screen, the entire document, so you want to play around with that until you get the size big enough that it fills up right up to the edge of the screen, something like that. I'm at around a little over 300 points in font size. It looks pretty good. Alright, the next thing we want to do once we get our word in there is we want to add what's called a faux bold to it. Again, highlighting all the letters here by clicking and dragging across them. Let's go up and find the character palette. The character palette here in the property toolbar, when you have the text tool selected, looks like this. Click on that, and there's all kinds of properties you can change for your text. It's called the character palette. You can change the font, the type of font, the size, leading, which is the space between lines. Here we can also change what's called tracking, which is the spacing in between letters. Also, down in here we find a series of properties you can apply, and the very first one on the left is called faux bold. If you click that, you'll see that it adds a bold effect to it. Now it's called faux bold because it's kind of a fake bold. It's just a digital effect that's being applied there, and so sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. We'll go ahead and apply that to this particular font, Arial, and it looks pretty good. Alright, the next thing we want to do is apply what's called tracking and reducing the space between letters. So you can go ahead and put your cursor in between any one of these letters, holding the Alt key, then use the arrow keys to the right or the left to add or subtract space in between the letters. And so I want my letters to pretty much touch exactly like that. So I put my cursor in between each letter using the Alt key, pressing the Alt key, use the arrow keys, actually in this case the left arrow key, to remove space, just like that. Alt key plus an arrow key, and that will reduce the space. Alright, that looks pretty good. Once we have all the letters really close together so they're touching, we could come back in here, highlight it, and increase the size a little bit now, because now we've the word is no longer filling the page. There we go, that looks good. Okay, the next step in the process is to bring in the image that we want to use as part of our clipping mask. I'm going to go File, Open. Here's my tiger image called tiger.jpg. Opening that in its own window here in Photoshop. Next thing we need to do then is simply to bring this picture into our text or our document that has our text in it already. So coming back to the tiger, take the move tool, click and drag it up to the tab, then back to the center of the screen and let go. This picture, as you see, fits pretty well right into this image. Let's move it so it's right centered perfectly inside our other image. Alrighty. Again, I said it earlier, adding a clipping mask is really pretty easy. What you want to do is make sure that the image that you want to use is above your text layer. As you see, it is here in my layers window. Then just simply right click and select Create Clipping Mask. That's all it takes. We now have the image is visible only inside the text, which is on the layer directly below the image, the tiger text that we created earlier. The nice thing about a clipping mask is that the text and the image remain editable, meaning I can take this layer with the tiger image and I can move it around and place it where I want it to be so that the eyes are visible right here, as well as I can also continue to edit the text. I can come back to the text layer here, get my text tool, maybe again reduce or increase the tracking in between by holding the Alt key. One thing you'll notice about when you use faux bold is that when the image is deselected, the text tool is no longer selected, that bold effect seems to go away a little bit. It's not quite as pronounced. So you'll want to adjust your text so that these words or these letters are all touching. That looks pretty good. Alright, we're getting close to being done. The very next step then is we want to add a drop shadow to our text as well as a colored background to our entire image. So with the text layer selected, let's double click to the right of the layer name. That will open our layer style window. And from there we want to come down and not only check but also select the drop shadow effect option there. And if we can move it slightly out of the way, it'll allow us to see the effect going on in the background of our image. We want, with the drop shadow selected, we want to adjust the angle of the drop shadow. We want to adjust the distance. I'm putting mine at around 16, 15, something like that. The spread can be somewhere around 10. And the size, which is actually the blur, the amount of the blur, we can adjust that to around 10 as well. You can make whatever settings you think look good for your particular image. And the color of that is going to be black. I'll say OK to that. Whenever we add a layer style to a layer, you'll see the effects show up here in the layer window right below that layer. We're close to being done. Last thing we want to do now is add a color background to this. So from my layer window here, I'm going to select my background layer, which is currently white. And so I know I have my bottom layer selected. And I'm going to go ahead and select from the Create New Fill or Adjustment Layer button, which is here at the bottom right hand area of the Layers palette, and select Solid Color, which is the top option. And it gives me immediately the ability to now choose a color. I can either choose a color from this window, or I can even go out and select a color directly from the image. For example, by clicking somewhere in the image, I can select a color. Okay, so whatever color you like, you can go ahead, choose that, and say OK. We now have our finished image. We have a text layer that has a layer effect of a drop shadow applied. We learned how to adjust the tracking in between each letter so that the letters are touching. We learned how, most importantly, to add a clipping mask that allows the image that we've placed in here to show through the letters of our word. And Looks pretty good. We're done with this. Thanks for watching.